The story of the English language is one of the most fascinating journeys in human history. A tale that stretches across more than a millennium, shaped by invasions, migrations, cultural exchanges, and global encounters that transformed a local Germanic tongue into the world's most dominant language today. To understand English, one must begin with its humble origins, when Britain itself was a land of shifting peoples and tongues long before English was born. The island we now call England was once home to Celtic tribes whose languages had deep roots in Europe. These Celtic languages were spoken throughout the British Isles, and they carried with them stories, traditions, and poetic rhythms. When the Romans arrived under Julius Caesar's expeditions, and later with Claudius's conquest in 43 CE, Latin entered the land, leaving behind roads, towns, and administrative words. But Latin did not replace the Celtic languages entirely. Rather, it existed alongside them, influencing them in limited ways. Still, this Roman presence planted early seeds of words and structures that would later resurface in the English lexicon. When Rome fell and its power withdrew from Britain in the 5th century, new groups began arriving. Germanic tribes from across the North Sea, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, set sail for Britain. These tribes brought with them their own dialects of the West Germanic language family. As they settled and mingled, these dialects began forming the base of what we now call Old English. The very name England comes from the Angles, and the term English itself is rooted in their identity. Old English was very different from the English we know today. It was highly inflected, with complex grammar, multiple cases for nouns, and verb conjugations that gave it a structure closer to Latin or German than to modern English. Words like sinning for king, wife for wife, and man for man are reminders of its Germanic foundations. Yet Old English was not a static tongue. It was alive, growing, and already borrowing from the Celtic substratum and the remnants of Latin influence left behind by Rome. Over the centuries, Christianity came to Britain, and with it arrived Latin in greater force. Missionaries brought not only the faith, but also literacy, introducing the Roman alphabet that replaced the earlier runic script. Latin words for religion, learning, and scholarship entered Old English, enriching it with terms like minster for monastery and ennial for angel. At the same time, the Vikings from Scandinavia began raiding and then settling in large parts of England. Their language, Old Norse, was a cousin of Old English, and the two tongues blended in fascinating ways. Norse words such as sky, egg, knife, they, and husband slipped into English, and in some cases, Norse simplified the grammar of Old English. The mixing of these languages reduced inflections and made word order more important, an early step toward the modern form of English. By the 11th century, Old English had developed into a rich literary language, capable of epic poetry and prose. Works like Beowulf stand as monuments to this early stage, with rhythms and vocabulary that feel both familiar and alien to us today. But everything changed in 1066 with the Norman Conquest. William the Conqueror and his French-speaking Normans defeated the Anglo-Saxons at the Battle of Hastings, and French became the language of power, law, and high society in England. For the next several centuries, English existed in a kind of shadow, spoken by the common people, while French and Latin dominated government, education, and literature. Yet English did not die. Instead, it absorbed vast amounts of French vocabulary. Words for law, fashion, art, and cuisine poured in court, judge, beauty, government, beef, pork, and many others. The blending of French and English created Middle English, a language that began losing many of the complex endings of Old English, simplifying grammar while vastly expanding its vocabulary. It was during this period that Geoffrey Chaucer wrote the Canterbury Tales, demonstrating that English had regained enough strength and prestige to be a literary language once more. Middle English was still far from the modern tongue. It had different pronunciations and spellings, and its words sometimes feel strange to us. But it was recognizable, a bridge between the old Germanic roots and the French influences that made English flexible and expressive. By the late Middle Ages, the Hundred Years' War and the decline of French power in England pushed English back into prominence. Kings began using it in official documents, and the people embraced it as a symbol of national identity. The Renaissance brought yet another transformation. The rediscovery of classical learning and the expansion of global horizons injected English with new vitality. Latin and Greek terms flooded into the language, especially in fields like science, philosophy, and the arts. At the same time, the invention of the printing press by William Caxton in 1476 standardized spelling and grammar to some degree, though inconsistencies remained. This period gave rise to what we call early modern English, the language of Shakespeare and the King James Bible. Shakespeare himself coined or popularized thousands of words and phrases that remain in use today, from assassination to all's well that ends well. The King James Bible, published in 1611, provided a majestic and poetic form of English that shaped the rhythm and tone of the language for centuries. During this time, the great vowel shift dramatically altered pronunciation. Long vowels began to be pronounced higher and further forward in the mouth, changing the way words sounded without altering their spelling. This shift explains why English spelling today often seems inconsistent with pronunciation, a challenge that learners around the world continue to face. Early modern English had grown into a language of immense expressive power, capable of capturing the full range of human emotion, thought, and creativity. As England expanded its influence through exploration, trade, and colonization, English traveled with it. The language crossed the Atlantic with settlers in the Americas, where it began to develop its own characteristics. American English emerged, shaped by contact with Native American languages, African languages through the slave trade, and the languages of later immigrants such as Germans, Italians, and Irish. Across the globe, English absorbed words from every culture it encountered. From India came words like bungalow, pajamas, and shampoo. From the Caribbean came hurricane and barbecue. From Africa came banjo and zebra. English became a sponge, drawing in vocabulary and idioms from every corner of the world. By the 18th and 19th centuries, English had become the language of science, philosophy, and empire. The Industrial Revolution added technical vocabulary, while the British Empire spread English to Asia, Africa, and Oceania. English language literature flourished with writers like Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, and the poets of the Romantic and Victorian eras. Dictionaries, such as Samuel Johnson's great work in 1755 and later the Oxford English Dictionary, attempted to codify and record the vast and growing lexicon. Meanwhile, debates arose about grammar, spelling, and purity, but English continued to evolve organically, resisting rigid control. In the 20th century, global events solidified English's position as a world language. The United States emerged as a cultural, political, and economic superpower, exporting not only goods, but also films, music, and literature. Jazz, Hollywood movies, rock and roll, and later hip-hop spread American English slang and style worldwide. British English retained its prestige, especially through institutions like the BBC, but American English became increasingly dominant. World War II, the rise of international organizations like the United Nations, and the spread of global trade reinforced the role of English as a lingua franca, the common language for communication between speakers of different native tongues. The information age accelerated this dominance. The Internet, much of its early content created in English, made the language essential for global communication. Scientific research, business negotiations, and academic publications increasingly relied on English as the standard medium. Today, more people speak English as a second language than as a native one. It serves as the bridge language for international travel, diplomacy, and technology. English exists in countless varieties, from Indian English to Nigerian English, from Australian to Singaporean. Each has its own accent, vocabulary, and cultural flavor, yet all are connected through a shared core. Despite its dominance, English is not fixed. It continues to evolve daily, shaped by popular culture, technology, and social change. The rise of texting and social media has introduced abbreviations, emojis, and new slang that influence speech and writing. Globalization ensures that English continues to borrow words from other languages, while also giving back by contributing English words to them. Critics worry about linguistic imperialism, the overshadowing of local languages by English, but at the same time, English provides a tool for cross-cultural communication that has no equal. The journey of English is not merely about words and grammar. It is about people, history, and identity. It reflects invasions and conquests, but also creativity and adaptability. It is the story of peasants and kings, poets and scientists, sailors and traders. From the rough poetry of Beowulf to the elegance of Shakespeare, from the colonial administrators in India to the hip-hop artists in New York, English has been shaped by every hand that has touched it. It is not a pure language, nor has it ever been. It is a language of mixtures, of borrowings, of reinvention. That is precisely why it has thrived. Looking to the future, English may change in ways we cannot predict. Perhaps regional varieties will grow stronger, creating multiple global Englishes rather than one dominant form. Perhaps technology will alter how we use written and spoken language entirely. Yet the resilience of English suggests that it will remain central to global communication for generations to come. Its history shows that it has always adapted, always evolved, always absorbed what it needed to survive. From the fields of Anglo-Saxon England to the skyscrapers of modern cities, from ancient manuscripts to digital tweets, English carries the memory of its journey while constantly rewriting itself for the present. Thus, the story of English is not finished. It is being written every day in classrooms, on stages, in films, in offices, and online. Every speaker, whether native or learner, adds to its vast and living tapestry. The English language stands as one of humanity's greatest shared creations, a tool that has united people across borders and centuries. It began as the speech of a few tribes on a distant island, and now it echoes across the world, proof of the power of words to travel, to transform, and to endure.